As I'm aware that many people before me have completed a hand-to-hand only run of Oblivion, I'm not sure that any have done it quite like this. As the title says, I'm going to be attempting to complete Oblivion as a bum. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, let's get into the rules straight away so you can understand what I'm getting myself into. Some of these rules will come into play right after the opening sewers, as I was still kinda trying to develop them, but with that out of the way, here are the rules. No armor. I can wear clothes as long as they have 0 armor value, having a particular affinity for sack clothing. The only thing I could purchase are lockpicks and alcohol, naturally. Potions and things that are found or looted are also fair game. I just can't buy them. Hand-to-hand combat and basic restoration spells only. I can't craft or create any spells or potions, only relying on what I can scavenge for, and no scrolls either. I can sell things for money, but again, only purchase the 2 items I mentioned in Rule 2. And lastly, I'm playing on Mastered difficulty. Yes, I know, this basically just turns enemies into glorified damage sponges, but it forces me to come up with some, well, let's just say creative strategies to get through the story. Alright, let's begin this mess. As is tradition with any Oblivion run, the very first step is to immediately change the difficulty to Master. You thought I was gonna say create an abomination, when in reality, that's actually step number 2. So, like literally everyone else who's done this run before me, I'm gonna be selecting Khajiit as my race. Not only for the bonuses to melee damage, but also because they're my favorite race and the most likely of them all to be homeless. And I'm not offering any other context on that statement. The third step in this run is going to be to name my character. Chunk the Drunk. Perfect. Once I'm in control of Chunk and awake in my prison cell, I'd get harassed by my racist neighbor. But I'd quickly get to rub it in his face when the Emperor came in to tell me about his dreams and let me out of the cell via a secret passageway. Making my way through the secret tunnel with the Emperor and his entourage, we fight together to defeat a few assassins, while I get an opportunity to see how terribly weak my fists really are on Master difficulty. After getting told that I can't go on any further with his crew, a nearby wall breaks down and a few rats come pouring out. Now, I still don't have the damage, or more importantly, the health, to take on these little rodents and zombies in my path, so I sprint by all of them and regroup with the Emperor. Once the Emperor hands me his amulet and gives me some vague instructions, he's killed under my watch, leading to Boris getting real pissed off at me. Nonetheless, before he died, he blessed me with some more bonuses in the form of a birth sign. Since none of these birth signs are relegated to being a homeless man, I settle for the warrior sign as it gives me bonuses to both strength and endurance. Once the Emperor is assassinated, Boris mistakenly takes me for a scout, but he's wrong. I'm still just a bum. Time to build myself a custom class. Not really knowing what to build quite yet, and not exactly sure what this run's rules are at the moment, I spec in a strength and agility for my primary attributes and these 7 major skills. I honestly wasted 1 on the heavy armor skill here, so that's a bummer, but we move on regardless. Finally, I get to leave the sewers and I'm freed into the lands of Tamriel, or more specifically, Cyrodiil. Heading into the Imperial City, I'd come to realize how appropriate it would be for me to be naked at the very least, so I sell all my possessions and head to the King and Queen Tavern to begin stealing all the alcohol from its cellars. After getting my hands on some liquid courage, I finally set off to Waynon Priory to give the amulet to Joffrey as instructed by the Emperor. Once I'd done that, I then traveled to Kvatch and got a sneak peek on what lies ahead of me by foolishly diving headfirst into the freshly opened Oblivion Gate, terrorizing the city. Since I'm a bum who isn't very good at anything in particular, I used my friend Sir Vonius to get most of the way through this gate, getting to the tower with him at the very least before he died a noble death. Once I realized I was in way over my head with my current stats the way they were, I backed the hell out of this gate to reassess and reevaluate my options. The plan I'd eventually come up with was to level up my hand-to-hand as much as I possibly could, so I had an actual chance at this gate the next time around. This took me to a cave near the sewer exit in an attempt to take out some of its low-level enemies. I went inside to find and beat up some imps inhabiting it. In here, I didn't gain a ton of experience in regards to my character, but I did learn a lot on how to navigate combat from here on out. Once the cave was clear, I wandered around, trying to kill some mud crabs to continue my XP farm. After defeating a couple on the shoreline close by, I went back to the Imperial City to scrounge around once again, as well as sleeping in a bed to level up. While I was here, I did find some more alcohol around town, as well as some raggedy-ass sack clothes. Remember, I was allowed to wear anything without an armor value, but I'd really stick to the sack clothing as my default. After finding out how difficult combat was at this point, I turned to my next best option. I call it the cheese method. I set out to Periite's shrine to beat up some poor unconscious fellas deep in their worship. I did this until I hit a hand-to-hand level of 75. Now, after beating up these poor old saps for some hard-earned levels, I went back to Kvatch and slept a few times in a nearby bed until I'd reached level 8. Listen, I know this makes the game technically harder, but I don't care. I desperately wanted those stat points. When going back into the Oblivion gate, I did rush through the majority of it again, at least far enough to get up to the upper room with a few scamps located inside. I stupidly thought that they'd have the sigil key on them since, I hadn't played this game since I was a child, so I went on to work taking both of them out. After rethinking my life decisions after finding out that neither had the key, I made my way over to the true keeper of the key, the sigil keeper, obviously. I managed to con him out of his life by abusing his pathing and only going on the offensive when he used a specific attack that put him at a disadvantage. After grabbing the key off his corpse, I went back to open the sigil doors and sprinted my way to grab the stone and close the gate. Once the gate was closed, however, the fight wasn't quite over yet. Kvatch still had a mess of Daedra to clear out of its inner gates. I raced through the majority of this area as well to get safely inside the chapel. See, the Daedra feared the might of God, so they wouldn't dare make their way inside. Heading out of here shortly after arriving, alongside Savlian, we'd go to fight off some more Daedra until we'd make it to the castle's gates. They're unfortunately locked, so I'm sent back to the chapel to speak with Barrick and go with him into the secret tunnels under the chapel to get in and lower the gates this way. Not sure why we couldn't all go, but whatever. Barrick took out most of the enemies down here by himself, with me chipping in however I could. Then we continued on our mission. We lowered the gates and met back up with Savlian and his crew. I honestly tried my best to do damage or distract the enemies while the guards fought everyone off, eventually clearing the area of all the enemies. Savlian is the only one left standing after this skirmish, so I went into the castle alone and pulled every enemy out of there one by one so Savlian could kill them off, since I do literally no damage and get almost one hit by every enemy. And I didn't know it at the time, but I could have easily just ran inside and grabbed the Count's ring to bring it back out to Savlian and finish the quest that way, but instead I went with this route, which took a lot longer than it should have. Now that Kvatch was in a safe spot for now, I went off to find Brother Martin down at the refugee camp and inform him of who he actually is. A bastard. Literally. This led us to heading back to Wenyan Priory together to reunite him with his father's amulet. Upon our arrival, it's under attack by Daedra, of course, and after distracting them enough to let my friends do all the work, we came to find that we were too late, and they'd already found and stolen the amulet. I fast traveled from here to Cloud Ruler Temple with Brother Martin and Joffrey to introduce them to Brother Martin and share with them his true family lineage. We parted ways from here as I needed to go to the Imperial City and talk with Varus once again. He's being followed by a suspicious person and requested that I spoke with him in private. After following him and his tail down to the cellar, we get to work taking him out. Looting his corpse, we would come to find a book called the Mythic Dawn Commentaries Part 1. He thinks I should have a chat with Tarmina and learn more about these books. She had another one of the 4 books and knew that the shopkeeper of First Edition would have more information than her on where to locate the other 2. I'd learned that he'd had one on reserve for a fellow named Gwynas, and the 4th edition was apparently impossible to find. I tracked down Gwynas to goad him into giving up book number 3, as well as handing me a note that would lead me towards finding volume number 4. When I told Varus what I'd found, we were back to the sewers to go to meet up with the supposed sponsor of the Mythic Dawn. I was the one who'd killed most of the enemies myself in these sewers, but it was mostly mud crabs and rats, so that's really not saying much. Thankfully, my hand-to-hand has improved a lot since the last time I'd faced these types of enemies. When it came to it, I'd also volunteer to be the one to meet the sponsor instead of Varus, not because I thought that I was a better choice. No. Mostly because I could hit the sponsor with a surprise attack before the 2 other Daedra would come in and spoil our fun. The reason I had to do it this way was so Varus would stay alive long enough to kill the sponsor before dying himself, and so I had time to claim the last book of the series from his body. The reason I needed Boris to do it was because every time I'd punch Raven myself, I'd take quite a bit of damage. Also, my damage output was, and forever will be, absolutely pitiful. Now, after gathering the final book and leaving the sewers, I'd bring them all back to Tarmina. I waited around for her to decipher them, and once she'd done so, I was now instructed to touch the tomb of Prince Camaril, and reveal the secret location of the Mythic Dawn hideout, the Lake Aria's Cavern. I'd arrive at the Mythic Dawn hideout, and before entering, I'd need to relinquish all my current possessions. This included my sack clothing and all my alcohol. I followed Haro into the antechamber to witness Mankard teleport himself to another dimension using the amulet. But after I paid blood sacrifice in the form of Gelis, I could steal Mankard's book off the podium. Of course, after the majority of people cleared off. However, there was still some people who saw this theft, so once I'd stolen the book, I booked it for the exit, leaving all my belongings behind. Getting back to Joffrey, I'm informed of some spies somewhere around the area and he wanted my help finding them. After a talk with Captain Stefan, I learned that a few weirdos like to lurk around the Doomstone after 6 p.m, so I followed up on this lead and went there to wait. I truly wanted to kill the both of them myself, but I was still kind of a bitch, so I instead led them up to Cloud Ruler Temple to let the guards tear them to pieces, with me offering whatever help I could. After collecting their key and getting permission to search the spies' houses for any more evidence of their wrongdoing, I explored the cellar under their house and found some Mythic Dawn orders left out on the table. Talking with Martin about these orders, he's got some orders of his own. He needs a Daedric artifact. I thought I'd heard somewhere online that Umbra was a Daedric artifact, and so, without Googling it, I trusted this false memory and sought to cheat Umbra out of her life. After making my way through the few rats and goblins in my path, I could punch Umbra once and begin sprinting the fuck out of there with her chasing close behind. My plan was to lead her back to the Imperial City and let the guards do my dirty work, so that's exactly what I did. Once the guards put her down, losing a few good men in the process, I'd collect Umbra and try to gaslight Martin into believing that that's what he was looking for. He wasn't gonna believe me on this, so I moved on to the second part of this quest after realizing myself that it was not, in fact, a Daedric artifact. So I brought it over to the shrine of Clavicus Vial so I could try and use it as a bartering tool. I was told by one of the worshippers of this shrine that I needed to pay 500 septums to unlock this option, but I'm a bum, so where am I gonna get that kind of money? I genuinely considered selling Umbra for the money, and I'm glad I didn't. However, after leaving back to Cloud Ruler Temple to explore a different path, I got the option to turn Umbra back into the shrine. So back I go, exchanging the blade for the mask of Clavicus Vial, a real Daedric artifact. With my artifact in hand, I went back to Martin to see what he needed from me now. A gate had just opened up in Bruma, and I, alongside a handful of soldiers from Bruma, needed to close it before I could move on. Making short work of this gate, I jumped the bridge just inside to get across the lava river and skipped the majority of the combat outside. With the Bruma soldiers' help, we made pretty light work of everyone inside the tower, all the way up to the Sigil Keeper. After helping kill him and grabbing the key, I can now pass through the door guarding the stone, sprint up there, and remove it to close the gate. From here, I now had the quest allies for Bruma. This sent me heading off to Coral first, in hopes they'd lend us some aid in a future fight. The Countess here required me to close a gate of her own that just so happened to open up just outside their wall. I was pretty apathetic to do this for her, to say the very least, and I do mean very least. So much so that I barely stayed in there longer than I had to be, rushing into the gate, up the main tower, and grabbing the stone to quickly close it up. Now that I had Coral's aid for Bruma, I chose not to pursue this questline any further. I figured we would be just fine without anyone else's help. Now, this next part is where the game really started to ramp up in difficulty substantially, as if things hadn't been rough enough. Though, how much danger have I really been in with all these friendly NPCs around doing all my bidding? Well, this next task had me going in all alone. It got so rough that it even had me nearly heading up to Frostcrag to summon myself a little Atronach buddy. But I didn't. Sancre Tor. If I was to describe it in one word, that would be brutal. In the initial few hours I spent down here, I'd pretty much spend all my time getting two-shot against the first undead blade I tried setting free. And that's with one of those shots being blunted behind a block. After these few hours, there was a point where I'd heavily consider going to get my summoned follower. However, after a good night's sleep and after talking with another creator, Zeke Plays, who'd literally just completed a very similar challenge, I was able to confirm with him that the disarm function of the fists actually functioned in the remaster the same as the original, causing the enemies to actually drop their weapon. As, up to this point, it only ever looked like it made my foe put their weapon away and re-equip it extremely fast. So, it appeared that I had to be faster. Oh, he'd also informed me that there was a dodge ability that I wasn't privy to, but I'd only ever intentionally used that once to my advantage, but still, good knowledge to have regardless. So, following this conversation, I'd go put this disarm theory to the test, booting up my save file, winding up a heavy attack, and boom! He'd actually dropped it. Before he could recover from the power of my kitty claws, I managed to snag his dropped weapon and he was now turned into a zombie, but not the powerful kind that attacks back, and began a slow walking path to the exit. Now, our tussle had attracted 2 of the nearby ghosts to our location, so I would need to navigate around these dudes to continue walloping the skeleton back to its grave and releasing the spirit of the first of the blades, Rylus. There were just 3 more of these to go. Yippee! The next one I'd come to would have an army of these ghosts following me down to its location, making this one a bit more challenging. Well, that and the fact that he would actually continue trying to attack me after disarming him. But my strategy here was to just kite him and his ghost friends around, keeping him at arm's length so I could punch him into oblivion without taking any punches back. Thankfully, these ghost spells would also sometimes hit my target too, aiding me in my quest of his destruction. The next blade on my hit list I'd find all alone, and after knocking the sword out of his hand, I'd do much of the same to him as I did the last one, kiting him around the arena and finishing him off in no time. Now, the final blade was down in the prison and had a skeleton warden harboring a key to the locked door I'd need to pass through. I had no lockpicks, since the Mythic Dawn took him from me, so I'd first need to take him out before moving on. Using the same tactic as the last 2 before him, I'd knock the mace from his hand with a hefty blow, then kite him around until he'd crumble to the ground, passing through and onto the final blade. Thankfully, this blade was in spirit form already and would just pull the aggro from all the ghosts and target skeleton to him, so I'd literally just need to wallop on this skeleton until he was dead. Except, I'd lose health on every punch with this one for some reason, so I'd need to take periodic breaks to restore my health and continue on his beating. And this dude, I'd need to wait for his ass to walk as slow as possible back to the tomb so he could take a knee with the other 3 and unlock my path to claim the armor of Tiber Septim. Looking back, I probably should have taken care of this one first. This is where the heartbreaking part of my story happens. My footage from here on out, well, up until the point of defeating Mankar, was lost to OBS. Classic OBS. However, I was confident in my abilities to recreate all of this, but it was kind of a rush job, so don't be mad at me, okay? Be mad at OBS. After bringing the armor to Martin, he now needed a great Welkin stone, and only knew of one place to get it, but it was extremely dangerous. But not for me. Before heading out, I'd stop off in the Imperial City to purchase some lockpicks from Shady Sam, sell all my Daedric possessions I'd gathered from the Oblivion Gates, and bought some more alcohol. Taking off to Misgarcan as soon as I had all my supplies. Like I said, this footage was a rush job, and seeing as I knew where all the buttons were to progress through this area, I made this look like a sloppy try at a speedrun. After locating and grabbing the stone, I waited for the zombies and King aggroed onto me to filter into the room a bit more. I then sprinted around and past them, stepped on a pressure plate into the next room, picked the door in the room after that, and booked my ass out of here and back to Martin. Martin's crazy ass, with all that I'd brought to him up to this point, was now trying to open a Great Gate in order to access a Great Sigil Stone to counteract the Welkin Stone. What a madman. So, with the aid I've gotten earlier from Coral, we were ready to battle against a horde of demons pouring from the Gates of Oblivion. I did what I could in this battle, which honestly wasn't much, but as soon as the Great Gate was opened, I dove inside. Once on the other side, I got a message that Martin had died and all hope was lost, but after reloading the autosave I'd just gotten upon entering, he was apparently actually alive, and I could go about my business. Thankfully, I wouldn't really need to fight anything in here, which was actually good news as I was on a time limit, So I sprinted through the first couple towers, traversing bridge after bridge, trying to get closer to the one holding the stone. Once I'd gotten to the main tower, there were gates blocking my way forward, so I'd need to climb one of the 2 nearby towers to the top, pull a lever, and get them open. As soon as that was done, it'd be a mad dash to the top of the main tower to snag the Great Sigil Stone and close up the gate, bringing the fight to a close. Now, upon returning to Cyrodiil, I'd find that Martin was in an unconscious state, but still standing. However, inaccessible to me. But after a quick save and reload, he was magically awake and ready to progress our quest to recover the amulet. With everything now in place, Martin could now open a portal to Mankar's paradise, and I was going in solo once again. At least for a little while. The one part of this sequence I wasn't able to recreate for some reason was having one of the Ascended Immortals beat on Cthulhu after I'd disarmed him. But whatever, not that important. Progressing through paradise and into Mankar's Karak Agialor, Sirach Alligator. Yeah, progressing through paradise and into Mankar's Sirach Alligator was where I'd ultimately thought the run was done. I would spend hours upon hours in this room, and unfortunately, all that footage is lost. Though, through it all, I'd found a way to get my champion Eldamil to put a stop to Mankar once and for all, as janky as this tactic was. So, this doesn't work all the time, clearly, but I'd found that if I'd hopped up on the top frame of the door leading into this area, that I could eventually confuse the AI into thinking I'm inaccessible and just bunch up together in the doorway below me. Mankar would constantly be summoning a flame Atronach that would pull Eldamil's aggro away from him quite often, which was kind of the most frustrating part of this ordeal. This didn't happen the first time I beat him. But mostly, once the AI was tricked into not attacking me, I just have to wait for Eldamil to work his magic. Literally. Finally, after a few minutes of waiting and cheering on from the sidelines, he'd put an end to Mankar. I could now hop down and collect the amulet and be transported back to Martin to return it to him. Once Martin was finally at his final form, we'd need to head off to the Imperial City and defend it from Meyrum's Dagon and his army of demons. Thankfully, we had an army at our side too, and with their help protecting Martin, I'd eventually live long enough to get the prompt from Martin that it was too late to light the dragon fires and to take him to the Temple of the One. From here, we could simply rush to the temple, talk to Martin, and watch as he turns into a fucking dragon and puts a stop to Meyrun and his tyranny. Though before Martin could finish his epic transformation, I'm interrupted by the fucker Akado trying to steal the show. But after he was done yapping, I could watch the rest of the epic cutscene and finish this run. So, if this run was specifically a can you beat Oblivion with their fists run, I'd agree that it was a pretty pitiful one. I mean, I barely did any fighting myself when all was said and done, but that's not what this run was about. I sought out to see if I could beat Oblivion as a bum. So, honestly, letting my allies do most of the work for me is pretty on brand if I say so myself. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you can beat Oblivion on Master difficulty as a bum. Honestly, I'd originally had in my rules to be constantly under the influence of alcohol throughout this run, and I tried for the most part, as you could probably see in the footage, but there really weren't any visual changes that made it worth it to make it an entire rule. Even when I would be intoxicated in-game, it seemed like it would have minimal negative effects. But either way, I answered the question I sought out to answer, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what my next challenge should be, and until next time, bye-bye.